What would you do if police officers arrested you, destroyed your belongings, and humiliated you in front of a crowd, all while you remained completely silent, knowing that in just a few hours, military Blackhawks would be landing to extract you? This is the story of Jade Romano, a decorated Army Ranger who let two small-town officers destroy her reputation for 30 minutes because she knew exactly who was coming for her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The industrial complex stretched across 15 acres of concrete and steel, separated from the main highway by nothing more than a chain-link fence and a series of weathered warning signs. Westfield Industrial Zone had been abandoned for the better part of 3 years, its empty warehouses and crumbling loading docks serving as monuments to a manufacturing boom that had died as quickly as it had begun. To most people driving past on Route 47, it looked like nothing more than urban decay, another casualty of economic shifts and corporate relocations. But to Jade Romano, it was something else entirely. It was the perfect insertion point. At 28, Jade carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from surviving situations most people couldn't imagine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes, faded jeans, a black jacket, and worn hiking boots that had seen more action than most soldiers' combat gear. Nothing about her appearance suggested military training, which was exactly the point. The best operators she'd learned during her 6 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment were the ones who could blend into any environment without raising a single eyebrow. She guided her modified Dodge Ram Iron Phoenix through the broken gate at the complex's eastern entrance, the truck's reinforced chassis handling the uneven terrain with ease. The modifications weren't visible to casual observers: upgraded suspension, run-flat tires, and a communications array hidden beneath the exterior, but they served their purpose. This wasn't just transportation, it was a mobile command center disguised as an ordinary pickup truck. Jade checked her watch. 0530 hours. Right on schedule. The pre-dawn darkness provided perfect cover for what she needed to accomplish, and the industrial zone's isolated location meant she could work without civilian interference. Her mission parameters were simple: establish a forward operating base, test the new tactical communication systems, and prepare for the joint training exercise scheduled to begin in 48 hours. What made this mission unique wasn't the technology or the location, it was the absolute secrecy requirement. After 3 botched training exercises had been compromised by media leaks and political grandstanding, the Pentagon had decided to test their new protocols the old-fashioned way, without telling anyone outside the immediate chain of command. No local law enforcement notifications, no courtesy calls to municipal authorities, no press releases about military cooperation with civilian agencies. Jade understood the reasoning, even if it made her job more complicated. Too many training exercises had been turned into photo opportunities, with politicians showing up for ribbon cuttings and journalists asking questions that revealed operational details better left classified. This time, they were going dark. Complete operational security until the exercise concluded.
She parked the truck near the largest warehouse, a 3-story structure with loading bays that could accommodate the helicopters scheduled to arrive in 36 hours. The building had been selected because its reinforced concrete construction could support heavy equipment, and its proximity to open ground made it ideal for helicopter operations. More importantly, satellite reconnaissance had confirmed no civilian activity in the immediate area for over 6 months. Jade stepped out of the truck and surveyed the terrain with practiced eyes. Wind direction, visibility lines, potential cover positions, emergency egress routes, all the factors that could mean the difference between a successful mission and a disaster. The morning air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of rust and diesel fuel from the abandoned machinery scattered throughout the complex. From her jacket pocket, she retrieved a handheld device that looked like a civilian GPS unit but served a very different purpose. The encrypted communicator connected directly to military satellites, providing real-time coordination with command centers 3,000 miles away. She powered it on and began the first phase of her assignment, mapping the electronic signature of the area. Every building, every piece of abandoned equipment, every potential interference source needed to be cataloged and analyzed. The communication systems they were testing represented millions of dollars in research and development, designed to provide seamless coordination between ground forces and air support in hostile environments. A successful test here could revolutionize special operations tactics. A failure could set the program back by years. As she worked, Jade thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. 6 years ago, she'd been a small-town police officer in Montana, convinced she was making a difference by writing traffic tickets and responding to domestic disturbance calls. The military recruiter who'd approached her at a local diner had painted a very different picture of public service, one that involved protecting national security rather than enforcing speed limits. The transition hadn't been easy. Ranger training had pushed her beyond limits she didn't know she possessed, breaking her down physically and mentally before rebuilding her into something harder and more capable. She'd learned to navigate with nothing more than a compass and instinct, to operate communication equipment under enemy fire, and to make life-or-death decisions in situations where hesitation meant failure. But perhaps the most valuable lesson she'd learned was patience. Real operators, her instructors had emphasized, knew when to act and when to wait. They understood that sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all, that silence could be more devastating than violence, and that allowing others to reveal their true nature was often more effective than any direct confrontation. It was a lesson she was about to put to the ultimate test. Jade finished her initial sweep and returned to the truck, satisfied that the location met all operational requirements. The communication array deployed smoothly, its signal strength well within acceptable parameters. Phase 1 was complete. She settled into the driver's seat to begin documenting her findings, unaware that 2 patrol cars were already turning off Route 47, drawn by reports of suspicious activity in the restricted zone. In exactly 27 minutes, officers Caleb Hayes and Mason Brooks would discover her presence. In 34 minutes, she would be zip-tied on the ground, her equipment scattered and destroyed. And in 2 hours and 16 minutes, the sound of approaching Blackhawks would change everything. But for now, Jade Romano sat in comfortable silence, methodically completing her mission while the sun crept slowly above the horizon, painting the abandoned industrial complex in shades of gold and shadow.
Officer Caleb Hayes spotted the truck first, its dark silhouette parked between 2 concrete loading docks like it belonged there. He slowed his patrol car and reached for his radio, nodding toward his partner in the passenger seat. "Control, Unit 23. We've got a possible 1054 at Westfield Industrial, Sector 8 Charlie. Single civilian vehicle, appears occupied." Officer Mason Brooks straightened in his seat, already reaching for his citation book. At 34, Brooks had been working this beat for 8 years, long enough to know that anyone in the industrial zone after hours was either lost, drunk, or up to something they shouldn't be. In his experience, it was usually the third option. "Copy that, Unit 23, came the dispatcher's response. "Be advised, no authorized personnel scheduled for that sector. Proceed with standard protocol." Hayes pulled the patrol car to a stop 50 yards from the Dodge Ram, positioning it to block the most obvious exit route. Both officers had worked together for 3 years, long enough to develop the kind of wordless communication that made encounters like this routine. Brooks would take point, Hayes would provide backup and watch for runners. Simple, straightforward, exactly the way they liked it. "Tinted windows," Brooks observed, adjusting his duty belt as he stepped out of the cruiser. "Can't see inside. Could be anyone in there." Hayes nodded,
his hand instinctively moving to rest on his radio. Yeah, well, they're about to find out this isn't a campground. They approached the truck with casual confidence, the kind of swagger that came from handling hundreds of similar situations. Westfield Industrial was their territory, and they'd cleared out everyone from teenage vandals to homeless camps to corporate executives who thought abandoned property meant free parking. The routine never changed. Identify the trespasser, issue the citation, escort them off the property. Most people complained for a few minutes, paid the fine, and never came back. Brooks knocked on the driver's side window with the back of his flashlight. Not hard enough to damage anything, but loud enough to make it clear this wasn't a request. The window rolled down smoothly, revealing a young woman with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in both officers simultaneously. "Morning," she said quietly. Her voice carried no nervousness, no surprise, no indication that being confronted by police officers was anything other than mildly inconvenient. "Morning," Brooks replied, though his tone suggested he found nothing good about the situation. "You realize this is a restricted area, no public access without authorization." Jade looked at him for a moment, then at Hayes, who had positioned himself slightly behind and to the right of his partner. "Standard tactical positioning," she noted. These weren't rookies, even if they weren't particularly sophisticated in their approach. "I have authorization," she said simply. Brooks snorted. "Yeah, let's see it." From the console beside her, Jade retrieved a leather wallet and handed it through the window. Brooks opened it, glanced at the identification inside, and immediately handed it back with obvious disdain. "Very funny. Military ID, huh? What's next? You're going to tell me you're on some secret mission?" "I'm conducting a communications test for a scheduled training exercise. My authorization code is Whiskey 77 Alpha. You can verify it through—" "Lady," Hayes interrupted, stepping closer to the truck. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this is private property. You're trespassing. Plain and simple." Jade studied both officers carefully. In her experience, there were two types of people who wore badges: those who understood that authority came with responsibility, and those who confused authority with power. These two clearly fell into the second category. "I understand your position," she said, "but if you contact your dispatch and run that authorization code, you'll find—" "What I'll find," Brooks said, his voice hardening, "is someone who thinks a fake military ID is going to get her out of a trespassing charge. Step out of the vehicle, please." It wasn't a request, and all three of them knew it. Jade made no move to comply, instead reaching slowly into her jacket pocket. Both officers tensed immediately, their hands moving toward their weapons. "Easy," Hayes barked. "Keep your hands where we can see them." "I'm reaching for my phone," Jade said calmly, "to contact my commanding officer and resolve this situation." "No calls," Brooks said firmly. "Step out of the vehicle, now." For a moment, the three of them existed in perfect stillness. The morning air carried the distant sound of traffic from Route 47, but inside this pocket of abandoned industrial property, the only sounds were breathing and the faint hum of the truck's idling engine. Jade could have ended the situation in any number of ways. Her hand-to-hand combat training gave her options that neither officer would see coming. Her knowledge of legal procedures could have shut down their authority in minutes. Her classified communication device could have brought federal authorities to the scene within the hour. But she did none of these things. Instead, she turned off the truck's engine, opened the door, and stepped out with her hands visible and her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She stood beside the driver's door, feet shoulder-width apart, posture relaxed, but ready. "Thank you," Brooks said, though his tone suggested no gratitude whatsoever. "Now let's try this again. What's your name, and what are you doing here?" "Jade Romano. And as I mentioned, I'm here on official business." Hayes walked around the front of the truck, examining the exterior with obvious suspicion. To him, it looked like any other civilian pickup, nothing special, nothing that suggested military connections or official authorization. "Official business," he repeated mockingly, in an abandoned industrial complex, at 5:30 in the morning, with no paperwork, no permits, and an ID that looks like something you ordered off the internet. The ID is genuine, as is my authorization to be here. Brooks pulled out his citation book and began writing. Here's what's genuine, Miss Romano. You're trespassing on private property. That's a $200 fine and a court appearance. You can explain your official business to the judge. Jade watched him write, noting the casual efficiency with which he filled out the form. This was clearly routine for him. Another day, another citation, another person who thought rules didn't apply to them. He had no idea that in less than 2 hours, his morning routine was about to be interrupted by the distinctive sound of military helicopters approaching at high speed. "Are you going to contest the citation?" Hayes asked, pulling out his own pen to add his signature as a witness. "No," Jade said simply. Both officers looked up, surprised. Most people argued, complained, demanded to speak to supervisors, or threatened lawsuits. This woman just stood there, accepting the citation as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Smart choice," Brooks said, tearing off the citation and handing it to her. "Now, you need to leave the property immediately. If we find you here again, it's arrest and impoundment." Jade took the citation and folded it once before placing it in her jacket pocket. "I understand." But as she moved to get back into her truck, Hayes held up his hand. "Actually, I think we need to take a closer look at this situation. Something doesn't feel right." Brooks nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm getting the same feeling. Miss Romano, I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle while we conduct a safety inspection." And just like that, the situation escalated from a simple trespassing citation to something much more serious. She could see it in their eyes, the shift from routine enforcement to active suspicion, from minor annoyance to perceived threat. She stepped away from the truck, her hands still visible, her expression unchanged, but inside, she was calculating timing, measuring distances, and preparing for what she knew was coming next. "Let's start with the truck," Brooks announced, circling the Dodge Ram like a predator sizing up prey. "Pop the hood." Jade reached through the driver's window and pulled the hood release. The modified engine bay revealed nothing obviously suspicious to the untrained eye. The communication equipment was hidden behind false panels, and the tactical modifications were designed to look like standard aftermarket upgrades. Hayes peered under the hood, his flashlight beam dancing across cables and components he didn't recognize but assumed were harmless. "Lot of extra wiring in here," he observed. "Aftermarket sound system," Jade replied calmly. It wasn't entirely a lie. The communication array did produce sound, just not the kind civilians typically listen to. Brooks was examining the truck's exterior more carefully now, running his hands along the wheel wells and bumpers. His fingers found the barely perceptible seam where the reinforced panels met the standard bodywork. "What's this?" "Rust protection," Jade said. "Feels more like armor plating." Brooks looked at Hayes meaningfully. "You know what this reminds me of? Those survivalist types, the ones who think the government's coming for them?" Hayes nodded, his suspicion deepening. "Or drug runners. They armor their vehicles, install communication equipment, use fake IDs. He turned back to Jade. "Miss Romano, I'm going to need you to empty your pockets. Everything." Jade complied without argument, placing her wallet, keys, phone, and the classified communication device on the truck's tailgate. The device looked like a standard GPS unit to casual observation, but Hayes picked it up immediately. "What's this?" "Navigation system." Hayes pressed the power button, and the screen flickered to life, displaying what appeared to be a standard mapping interface. The classified functions required biometric activation, so the device defaulted to its civilian camouflage mode. "Expensive for just navigation," Brooks observed, examining the device's military-grade construction. "This thing looks like it could survive a nuclear war." "I do a lot of off-road driving," Jade replied. But Hayes was no longer paying attention to her explanations. He'd found something that interested him far more: the leather wallet containing her military identification. He opened it again, this time studying the documents more carefully. "You know what?" he said slowly. "I've seen a lot of fake IDs in my time, and this one—" He held up the military ID card, examining it in the morning sunlight. "This one's pretty good. Professional quality." "Because it's real," Jade said quietly. "Is it?" Brooks joined his partner, taking the ID and studying it himself. "Army Rangers, huh? What's a big bad Army Ranger doing sneaking around abandoned buildings at dawn?" "As I explained, I'm conducting, right, communications test for a training exercise that nobody told us about on private property with no paperwork." "The exercise is classified. Local law enforcement was not notified for operational security reasons." Both officers burst out laughing. "Operational security," Brooks repeated, slapping his knee. "Oh, that's rich. Lady, do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound?" Hayes pulled out his radio. "Control, Unit 23. Run a check on military ID number—" He read the numbers from Jade's card. "Jade Romano, Army Rangers, and see if there are any scheduled military exercises in our sector." They waited while dispatch ran the check. Jade knew what the response would be. Her identification was legitimate, but the exercise information would be classified above the dispatcher's clearance level. To local law enforcement, it would appear that no such exercise existed. Unit 23, negative on military exercises in your sector. No scheduled activities, no notifications filed. However, the ID number does return as active military personnel. Hayes and Brooks exchanged glances. So the ID might be real, but there's no exercise. "Which means," Brooks continued, "she's either AWOL, using her position for something illegal, or running some kind of scam."
"The exercise exists," Jade said firmly. "Your dispatcher doesn't have clearance to access that information." "Clearance," Hayes laughed again. "You watch too many movies, lady. This is the real world. In the real world, when the military does exercises, they tell local law enforcement. It's called coordination. It prevents situations exactly like this one." Brooks was examining the contents of her truck more aggressively now, opening the glove compartment and center console. "What's this?" He pulled out a tactical knife in a military sheath. "Standard issue equipment," Jade replied. "For what? Cutting communications cables?" The implication hung in the air between them. These officers had moved beyond simple trespassing and were now building a case for something more serious: vandalism, breaking and entering, possibly even terrorism-related charges. "Officers," Jade said, her voice still calm, but carrying a slight edge now, "I strongly recommend you contact your watch commander before the situation escalates further." "Is that a threat?" Hayes stepped closer, his hand moving to his service weapon. "It's advice. From a trespasser with fake credentials and military equipment she has no business carrying?" Brooks had moved to her other side, effectively boxing her in. "You know what I think? I think you're one of those stolen valor cases. Fake military ID, fake story, real criminal intent." "My service record is easily verified," Jade said. "Yeah, then why are you here without authorization? Why is there no record of any military exercise? Why are you carrying tactical equipment in an abandoned building?" Brooks was getting more aggressive with each question, moving closer to her personal space. Jade could feel the situation spiraling beyond their control. These officers had convinced themselves of her guilt and were now looking for evidence to support their preconceptions rather than investigating objectively. It was a dangerous combination of incompetence and ego that she'd encountered before in various forms. "I'm going to make this simple," Hayes announced, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for criminal trespassing, possession of burglary tools, and suspected stolen valor. You have the right to remain silent." "I invoke that right," Jade said immediately, cutting off his Miranda recitation. Both officers stopped, surprised by her immediate invocation of silence. Most people, guilty or innocent, felt compelled to keep talking, to explain themselves, to prove their innocence through words. But Jade Romano had just shut down all communication, which, in their minds, confirmed her guilt. "Smart move," Brooks said approvingly. "Probably the smartest thing you've said all morning." Hayes moved behind her with the handcuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Jade complied, turning slowly and placing her wrists together behind her back. The metal cuffs clicked shut, slightly too tight, biting into her skin. But she didn't complain, didn't ask them to loosen the restraints, didn't make any sound at all. "There we go," Hayes said with satisfaction. "Much more cooperative now." Brooks was gathering her belongings from the tailgate, stuffing them into evidence bags with casual indifference. "We'll need to impound the vehicle, run a full forensic search, see what other surprises you've got hidden in there." Jade said nothing. She stood perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her expression neutral. To the officers, her silence looked like defeat, but they had no idea that her silence was actually strategic, that every moment of their misconduct was being recorded not just by the hidden surveillance systems in her truck, but by the communication device they'd dismissed as a simple GPS unit. In approximately 97 minutes, that recording would be reviewed by people with the authority to end both officers' careers with a single phone call. But for now, Jade Romano stood in handcuffs and waited, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all.
"On your knees," Brooks commanded, his hand pressing down on Jade's shoulder with unnecessary force. The concrete loading dock was rough and cold, littered with debris from years of abandonment. Jade lowered herself carefully, the handcuffs making it difficult to maintain balance. Her knees hit the concrete with a jarring impact that sent pain shooting up her legs, but her expression didn't change. "Head down," Hayes added, pushing her forward until her forehead was inches from the ground. "Stay there." The position was deliberately humiliating, designed to break down resistance and establish complete dominance. Jade had seen it used before, both as a necessary tactical measure in genuinely dangerous situations and as a power play by officers who confused cruelty with authority. This was clearly the latter. Brooks walked back to the patrol car and returned with zip ties and an evidence collection kit. "Standard procedure," he announced, though his tone suggested he was enjoying the process far more than professionalism required. "We secure the suspect, secure the scene, then conduct a thorough investigation." He knelt beside Jade and replaced the metal handcuffs with heavy-duty zip ties, pulling them tight enough to leave marks on her wrists. The plastic cut into her skin, but she made no sound, gave no indication of discomfort. "Comfortable?" Hayes asked mockingly. "Good, because you're going to be there for a while." A maintenance worker from the adjacent building had noticed the commotion and wandered over to watch from a safe distance. Then a jogger stopped on the nearby access road, phone already in hand, recording the scene. Soon, a small crowd had begun to gather, people drawn by the flashing lights of the patrol car and the unusual sight of someone being arrested in the abandoned industrial complex. Brooks noticed the gathering crowd and smiled. "Looks like you've got an audience," he told Jade. "Hope you don't mind being famous." The phones came out immediately. In the age of viral videos and social media justice, any interaction between police and civilians was potential content. The witnesses began recording from multiple angles, capturing Jade's forced submission and the officer's casual confidence. "What's she being arrested for?" someone called out. "Trespassing," Hayes replied loudly, clearly enjoying the attention. "Fake military ID, suspicious behavior, probably looking to steal copper wire or strip equipment." The assumption stung worse than the zip ties. To these officers and to the watching crowd, she was just another criminal, someone to be subdued, processed, and forgotten. They had no idea they were witnessing the systematic humiliation of someone who had risked her life defending their freedom to stand there and record her degradation. Brooks began his search of the Dodge Ram in earnest now, treating it like a crime scene rather than a personal property of someone who'd committed a minor trespassing violation. He opened every compartment, emptied every container, and examined every piece of equipment with theatrical thoroughness. "Let's see what our fake military was really up to," he announced for the benefit of the crowd. From the truck bed, he pulled out a canvas bag containing survival gear, water purification tablets, emergency rations, a compact first aid kit.
Standard equipment for someone conducting field operations, but to Brooks, it looked suspicious.
Survival gear, he called out. Either she's planning to camp here for a week or she's preparing for something bigger. He found the toolkit next, carefully organized and containing specialized equipment for electronic repairs and installation. Each tool was precisely placed, maintained to military standards, clearly the kit of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Burglary tools, Brooks announced, holding up a set of precision screwdrivers. Look at this organization. This is professional-grade stuff. The crowd murmured appreciatively. To untrained eyes, the tools did look sophisticated, almost sinister in their precision. The narrative Brooks was building, professional criminal using military disguise, was taking hold in the minds of the witnesses. Hayes had begun photographing everything with his phone, documenting what he believed was evidence of criminal intent. He snapped pictures of the toolkit, the survival gear, the communication device, and Jade herself, still kneeling on the concrete with her head down. "This is going in the report," he told her. "All of it. The fake ID, the burglary tools, the attitude. Judge is going to love this case." From her position on the ground, Jade could see the feet of the growing crowd. More phones, more recording, more witnesses to what was becoming a systematic character assassination. But she also noticed something the officers missed. Several of the witnesses were beginning to look uncomfortable with what they were seeing. A woman in scrubs, probably a nurse heading home from a night shift, lowered her phone and took a step back. An elderly man in a jogging suit shook his head and walked away. Even some of the more enthusiastic observers were beginning to question whether the level of force and humiliation was appropriate for what appeared to be a simple trespassing case. Brooks had found her personal belongings now, a small bag containing toiletries, a change of clothes, and a few energy bars. He dumped everything onto the concrete, letting the items scatter around Jade's kneeling form. "Living rough," he observed. "Probably homeless. That explains the military fantasy, gives her a sense of importance she's never actually earned." The casual cruelty of the comment drew visible reactions from the crowd. Several people looked genuinely disturbed by the officer's mockery of homelessness and military service. But still, no one intervened. The authority of the uniform, the official nature of the arrest, the assumption that the officers must know something the witnesses didn't, all of it combined to keep the crowd passive. Jade felt something she hadn't experienced in years: helplessness. Not because she couldn't defend herself, she had the training and ability to end the situation in seconds, but because doing so would compromise the mission and potentially endanger the exercise that would begin in 34 hours. Her orders were clear: maintain cover, avoid escalation, complete the objective, even if it meant enduring this. Hayes had moved on to searching the truck's interior, treating her personal space with the same disrespect Brooks had shown her belongings. He found a small notebook containing what appeared to be technical specifications and communication frequencies. "Jackpot," he announced, holding up the notebook. "Look at this. Radio frequencies, technical diagrams. This is surveillance equipment." The crowd pressed closer, intrigued by this new development. Phones focused on the notebook as Hayes flipped through pages of what looked like sophisticated technical information. "Industrial espionage," he suggested, or maybe she's casing the place for a bigger operation. "Either way, we've got her dead to rights." Jade closed her eyes and controlled her breathing. In exactly 83 minutes, the first wave of helicopters would begin their approach. In 85 minutes, radio chatter would light up with emergency traffic. In 87 minutes, these two officers would begin to understand exactly who they had spent the morning humiliating. But for now, she knelt on the concrete and let them destroy her reputation, one cruel assumption at a time.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "You know what I hate most about people like you?" Hayes said, crouching beside Jade's kneeling form. His voice was conversational, almost friendly, but there was an edge beneath it that made several witnesses shift uncomfortably. "You think you're special. You think rules don't apply to you." He reached into the truck center console and pulled out a small metal case, about the size of a hardcover book. The case was locked, its surface bearing no identifying marks except for a small serial number etched near the latch. "What's in the mystery box?" Brooks called out, temporarily abandoning his search of the truck bed. Hayes shook the case next to his ear, listening to the muffled rattle of contents inside. "Could be anything. Drugs, cash, surveillance equipment." He looked down at Jade. "Want to save us some time and tell us the combination?" Jade remained silent, her breathing steady despite the growing pressure in her chest. The case contained backup communication devices and emergency authentication codes, items that would be completely meaningless to local law enforcement, but could compromise ongoing operations if mishandled. "Silent treatment, huh?" Hayes stood up, still holding the case. "That's fine. We'll figure it out." What happened next would be discussed in internal affairs interviews for months afterward. Hayes raised the metal case above his head and brought it down hard against the concrete loading dock. The impact sent a sharp crack echoing across the industrial complex, and the case split open, spilling its contents across the rough surface. Electronic components scattered like broken jewelry, circuit boards, encrypted radio parts, and small devices that looked sophisticated and expensive. Several pieces bounced into puddles of rainwater that had collected in the uneven concrete, their circuits immediately compromised by moisture. "Oops," Hayes said, with a grin that suggested the destruction had been entirely intentional. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some people gasped at what appeared to be the destruction of valuable property, but others seemed to approve of the officer's aggressive handling of suspected criminal evidence. But a few witnesses lowered their phones entirely, clearly disturbed by what they were seeing. Brooks had found something else in the truck bed that caught his interest: a military-style sleeping bag and a small camping stove. Standard fueled equipment, but in his narrative, they became evidence of vagrancy and potential fire hazard. "Living in the truck," he announced to the crowd. "Probably been squatting here for days, maybe weeks. No telling what kind of damage she's already done to the property." He pulled out the sleeping bag and shook it vigorously, as if searching for hidden contraband. When nothing fell out, he tossed it onto the growing pile of Jade's scattered belongings. The sleeping bag landed partially in a puddle, immediately soaking up the dirty water. "That's military-issued gear," called out a voice from the crowd. An older man in a veteran's cap had pushed forward, his expression troubled. "That sleeping bag probably cost $300. Hayes turned toward the voice. "You know a lot about military gear, do you?" "I know enough," the veteran replied. "And I know destroying someone's property isn't standard procedure, even in an arrest." "Property of a criminal," Brooks corrected. "Evidence in an ongoing investigation. We'll handle it however we see fit." The veteran opened his mouth to argue further, but his wife tugged on his arm, pulling him back into the crowd. The message was clear: don't get involved, don't become a target yourself. Hayes had moved on to the truck's communications array, the sophisticated equipment Jade had spent weeks installing and calibrating. To his untrained eye, it looked like expensive stereo equipment, possibly stolen. "Now this is interesting," he said, running his hands over the control panel. "Custom installation, professional wiring. This setup probably cost more than her truck." He began disconnecting cables at random, pulling connections that had been carefully calibrated for optimal signal strength. Each disconnection caused error lights to flash on the display panel, and several components emitted warning beeps as their power supplies were interrupted. "Careful with that," Brooks warned with mock concern. "Wouldn't want to damage the evidence." Hayes laughed and yanked harder on a particularly stubborn cable. It came free with a shower of sparks, causing the main display to flicker and die. "Looks like it was already broken," he said innocently. From her position on the ground, Jade watched months of preparation being destroyed in minutes. The communication system represented not just her own work, but the efforts of dozens of engineers and technicians who had designed and built equipment capable of coordinating complex military operations in hostile environments. Now it was being dismantled by two officers who couldn't tell the difference between a radio antenna and a coat hanger. But more than the equipment, what bothered her was the psychological warfare they were conducting. This wasn't about gathering evidence or ensuring public safety. This was about breaking her down, making her beg, forcing her to submit completely to their authority. "You're awfully quiet over there," Brooks observed, walking over to stand directly in front of her kneeling form. "Starting to realize how much trouble you're in?"
Jade looked up at him for the first time since being forced to the ground. Her eyes were calm, almost eerily so, showing no trace of the fear or anger he expected to see. Instead, there was something else, a patience that suggested she was waiting for something specific. The look unnerved him more than tears or pleas would have. "What are you staring at?" he demanded. Jade lowered her gaze without answering, returning to her previous position. Her non-response only increased his frustration. "I asked you a question," Brooks said, his voice rising. "When I'm talking to you, you look at me and answer." Still nothing. Jade might as well have been meditating, so complete was her withdrawal from engagement. Hayes had found her personal journal now, a small leather-bound notebook she used to record observations and thoughts during long deployments. He opened it and began reading passages aloud, turning private reflections into public entertainment. "Listen to this," he called out. "Day 12, signal strength optimal, weather conditions favorable, equipment performing within parameters." He looked up with a smirk. "Sounds like someone's been playing soldier for a while." Several people in the crowd chuckled, but others looked increasingly uncomfortable. The systematic destruction of property, the public humiliation, the mocking of what appeared to be mental health issues, it was beginning to feel less like law enforcement and more like bullying. A woman near the back of the crowd had started a live stream on her phone, narrating the events for her viewers. "This is crazy," she whispered into her phone. "They're just destroying everything. I don't think this is legal." But the officers were too caught up in their performance to notice the shifting mood of their audience. They had established dominance, they had control, and they were enjoying the power trip immensely. What they didn't realize was that in approximately 54 minutes, the sound of approaching helicopters would cut through the morning air, and their world would change completely.
By now, the crowd had grown to nearly 30 people. Word had spread through social media, with the live streams drawing viewers who then shared the location with friends. Cars were pulling off Route 47, their occupants joining the growing circle of spectators documenting what was being described online as police brutality and stolen valor arrest gone wrong. Brooks seemed energized by the attention, playing to his audience with increasing theatricality. He had found Jade's military dog tags in her personal belongings and now held them up like a trophy. "Look at these," he announced. "Real official looking, aren't they? You can buy these at any military surplus store for $15. Probably got her whole costume there, the boots, the attitude, the fake tough guy act." He dangled the tags in front of Jade's face, close enough that the metal brushed against her forehead. "What do you think, soldier girl? Want to tell us where you really bought these?" The tags bore her real name, service number, blood type, and religious preference, information that would match military databases perfectly if anyone bothered to check. But Brooks had already decided what he wanted to believe, and facts weren't going to change his mind. Hayes had moved on to more personal items, pulling photographs from Jade's wallet and examining them with invasive curiosity. There was a picture of her graduation from Ranger School, another of her unit in Afghanistan, and a family photo from her last leave. "Look at this," he called out, holding up the Ranger graduation photo. "She's got a whole collection of fake military pictures, probably photoshopped herself into them." The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every detail. What they were seeing was a woman's entire identity being systematically dismantled and mocked, her service record being dismissed as elaborate fraud, her personal memories being treated as evidence of mental illness. But something interesting was happening within the crowd itself. The longer the officers spent destroying and humiliating, the more uncomfortable many witnesses became. Several people had stopped recording and were now arguing quietly among themselves about whether they should intervene. "This doesn't look right," an older woman whispered to her companion. "They're not even searching for anything anymore. They're just being cruel." "Should we call someone?" her friend replied. "Like their supervisor or something. But who do you call when the people supposed to protect and serve are the ones causing harm?" The question hung unspoken in the air, highlighting the helplessness that many citizens feel when confronting police misconduct. Brooks had found Jade's phone and was now trying to access it, pressing buttons and growing frustrated when the security features prevented him from viewing her personal information. Locked, of course, probably full of incriminating evidence. "We'll need to get a warrant for this." He held the phone high above his head, as if considering dropping it onto the concrete.
Then again, if it accidentally got damaged during the arrest, he let the threat hang in the air, watching for a reaction from Jade that never came. Hayes had discovered something that genuinely puzzled him, a small metal box containing what appeared to be military medals and ribbons. Unlike the dog tags or photographs, these were clearly genuine, with the weight and craftsmanship that distinguished real decorations from replicas.
"What's this supposed to be?" he asked, pulling out a Bronze Star medal. An Army veteran in the crowd recognized it immediately. "That's a Bronze Star," he called out. "You don't get those from surplus stores." Hayes examined the medal more closely, noting the engraving on the back that included Jade's name and service details. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, they had made a mistake. But Brooks quickly reinforced their shared narrative. "Stolen valor cases always have some real items mixed in," he said confidently. "They buy genuine medals online, get fake certificates made, build elaborate backstories. It's all part of the scam." The explanation satisfied Hayes, who placed the medals back in their box and tossed the container onto the pile of scattered belongings. It landed with a metallic clatter that made several veterans in the crowd wince. The systematic humiliation had been going on for nearly an hour now, and Jade remained exactly as they had positioned her, kneeling with her head down, hands zip-tied behind her back, surrounded by the wreckage of her equipment and personal belongings. Her knees were numb from the concrete, her shoulders ached from the awkward position, but her breathing remained controlled. What the officers and most of the crowd couldn't see was the subtle way she tracked time and movement. Her eyes, hidden by her downward gaze, periodically checked the angle of shadows to estimate the passage of time. Her ears, trained by years of combat experience, filtered the sounds around her. Footsteps, engine noises, radio chatter from the patrol car. 42 minutes to extraction. "You know what I think?" Brooks said, addressing the crowd as much as his partner. "I think this whole military act is some kind of mental health issue. PTSD, stolen valor syndrome, maybe just good old-fashioned delusions of grandeur." The psychological diagnosis, delivered by someone with no medical training, drew uncomfortable murmurs from several witnesses. But Brooks was warming to his theme. "We see it all the time. People who want to be heroes but never served. Or maybe they served but never saw action. So they create these elaborate backstories. Pretty soon, they start believing their own stories." Hayes nodded sagely. "It's actually kind of sad when you think about it. This woman probably needs help more than she needs jail time." The fake compassion was perhaps more cruel than outright hostility. They were now portraying themselves as concerned public servants dealing with a disturbed individual who needed psychological intervention rather than criminal prosecution. But even as they built their narrative of mental illness and stolen valor, several elements didn't quite fit their story. The quality of her equipment, the professional installation of the communication system, the genuine military items mixed with the supposed fakes, details that might have given more thoughtful officers pause. Instead, Hayes had begun taking selfies with the evidence, posing with destroyed equipment and scattered belongings as if they were trophies from a successful hunt. "This is going to make a great story at the station," he said, reviewing the photos on his phone. "Remember the time we caught that stolen valor case with the elaborate setup? They'll be talking about this for months." 37 minutes to extraction. The crowd had begun to fragment as the novelty wore off. Some people had left entirely, disturbed by what they'd witnessed. Others remained, but had stopped actively recording, their enthusiasm dampened by the prolonged nature of the humiliation. A few new arrivals had joined, drawn by the social media posts, but even they seemed unsure about what they were seeing. Jade lifted her head slightly, not enough to make eye contact with anyone, just enough to scan the horizon beyond the industrial complex. Somewhere out there, flight crews were conducting final equipment checks, reviewing extraction protocols, and preparing for a mission they believed was routine training.
In 35 minutes, they would learn otherwise.
At exactly 0847 hours, the first helicopter appeared as a dark speck against the morning sky, approaching from the northeast at an altitude that suggested this was no routine patrol or medical transport. The distinctive silhouette of a UH-60 Blackhawk became visible to those who knew what to look for. But to most of the crowd, it was simply an unexpected interruption to the morning's entertainment. Hayes was the first to notice, looking up from his systematic cataloging of Jade's belongings as the sound of rotor blades began to cut through the air. "Helicopter," he observed casually, "probably life flight heading to the hospital." But Jade knew better. She recognized the engine signature, the flight pattern, the precise coordination that indicated military rather than civilian aviation. Her internal countdown had been accurate. Extraction was arriving exactly on schedule. The Black Hawks circled the industrial complex once, its crew conducting a rapid reconnaissance of the landing zone and identifying potential threats or obstacles. Through the aircraft's windows, tactical teams could be seen preparing equipment and reviewing final instructions. "It's not heading to the hospital," someone in the crowd observed. "It's circling us." Brooks looked up from his evidence collection, shading his eyes against the morning sun as he tracked the helicopter's movement. "Probably news media," he said. "These videos have been going viral. Channel 7 loves this kind of story." The helicopter completed its circle and began descending toward the open area between the warehouses, its powerful downdraft sending debris and dust swirling across the loading dock. The crowd instinctively stepped back, but the officers held their ground, apparently unconcerned by the aircraft's proximity. That's when the second Blackhawk appeared. This one approached from the southwest, moving in perfect coordination with the first aircraft. It took a position on the opposite side of the complex, creating what anyone with military knowledge would recognize as a tactical deployment pattern designed to control access routes and establish operational security. "Two helicopters," Hayes said, his voice losing some of his casual confidence. "That's, unusual." The crowd was murmuring now, phones turning skyward to capture this unexpected development. The live streams that had been focused on Jade's humiliation were now broadcasting military aircraft to thousands of viewers, many of whom began commenting with questions about what they were witnessing. The first helicopter touched down 50 meters from the loading dock, its rotors still spinning as figures in tactical gear began emerging from both sides of the aircraft. They moved with the precise coordination of special operations personnel, spreading out to secure the immediate area. "What the hell?" Brooks muttered, finally beginning to understand that this was not media coverage or coincidental air traffic. The team from the first helicopter approached with weapons lowered but visible, their body language conveying both professional restraint and unmistakable authority. Their uniforms bore no obvious unit designations, but their equipment and movement patterns indicated elite training. Leading the team was a woman in her 40s, wearing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. She approached the scene with calm confidence. Her eyes immediately located Jade among the scattered equipment and debris. "Officers," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the loading dock, despite the ambient noise from the helicopters. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Grace Turner, Special Operations Command. You're going to want to step away from that person immediately." Hayes and Brooks exchanged glances, both clearly struggling to process this development. The narrative they had constructed, fake military ID, stolen valor, elaborate criminal scam, was being challenged by the arrival of actual military personnel who seemed to know exactly who Jade Romano was.
"Ma'am," Hayes began, his voice uncertain, "we're conducting a lawful arrest of a trespasser who was impersonating military personnel." Lieutenant Colonel Turner approached closer, and now the crowd could see the rest of her team taking positions around the perimeter. These weren't regular army troops or National Guard weekend warriors. These were professionals with the bearing and equipment of America's most elite units. "That person," Turner said, nodding toward Jade, "is Staff Sergeant Jade Romano, 75th Ranger Regiment, currently assigned to classified operations under my direct command. And you've just compromised a mission that's been months in preparation." The words hit the officers like physical blows. Brooks actually took a step backward, his face going pale as the implications began to register. Hayes opened his mouth, but no words came out. The crowd had gone completely silent, except for the whispered commentary of the live streamers, trying to explain to their viewers what was happening. Phones continued recording, but now they were capturing something entirely different. Not police brutality, but the moment when two officers realized they had made a catastrophic mistake. "There must be some misunderstanding," Brooks managed finally. "Her ID appeared fake. She had no authorization to be here. Dispatch said there were no military operations scheduled." "Dispatch," Turner interrupted, "doesn't have clearance for classified operations. The authorization you were looking for was embedded in systems you don't have access to, filed through channels you've never heard of, for a mission you don't need to know about." She walked over to where Jade remained kneeling and knelt beside her, pulling out a tactical knife to cut the zip ties. "Are you injured?" she asked quietly. "Negative," Jade replied, her first spoken word in over an hour. Turner helped her to her feet, and for the first time the crowd could see Jade Romano standing at her full height, shoulders back, posture reflecting her military training. The transformation was remarkable, from humiliated suspect to professional soldier in a matter of seconds. "Sergeant Romano," Turner said formally, "I need a sit-rep on mission status." Jade surveyed the wreckage of her equipment, the scattered personal belongings, the destroyed communication array. "Operational security has been compromised due to civilian documentation of activities." She gestured toward the crowd with their phones and cameras. "Recommend immediate extraction and mission reassessment." Turner nodded and turned back to the officers, who were now looking around desperately as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The second Black Hawk had landed, and more personnel were emerging, including what appeared to be military police. "Officers Hayes and Brooks," Turner said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "You're going to accompany my team for debriefing. This incident will be fully investigated, and all damaged equipment will be cataloged and assessed for compensation." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two officers who had spent the morning systematically humiliating and degrading Jade Romano were now being escorted toward military vehicles by personnel who clearly outranked anyone they had ever encountered. Jade began gathering her scattered belongings with calm efficiency, but Turner stopped her. "Leave it," she said. "Evidence collection will handle recovery. Right now, we need to get you out of here and assess what can be salvaged from this clusterfuck." As they walked toward the waiting Black Hawk, Turner spoke quietly. "How long were you down?" Jade replied. "Approximately 90 minutes. And you maintained operational security throughout?" "Yes, sir." Turner nodded approvingly. "Outstanding. This wasn't the test we planned, but it might have been the one we needed." The crowd watched in absolute silence as Jade Romano, the woman they had seen humiliated and degraded for over an hour, climbed aboard a military helicopter surrounded by special operations personnel who treated her with obvious respect and deference. The Blackhawks lifted off simultaneously, their powerful rotors drowning out any attempt at conversation. But no one in the crowd was talking anyway. They were all too busy trying to process what they had just witnessed and wondering how the videos they had recorded would look when the truth finally came out.
Within 6 hours, the first video had been viewed over 2 million times. The footage was devastating in its clarity. 90 minutes of systematic humiliation, property destruction, and psychological abuse, all captured from multiple angles by dozens of phones. But now the videos carried a different context entirely. Instead of showing justified police action against a suspected criminal, they documented the prolonged torture of a decorated Army Ranger conducting classified military operations. The transformation in public opinion was immediate and explosive. Detective Lisa Park received the assignment at 1400 hours, just as the story was breaking on national news networks. She arrived at the Internal Affairs Division to find a stack of evidence boxes, 17 formal complaints, and a conference room full of officials who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "This is a priority investigation," Chief Deputy Marshal Robert Chen explained, sliding a thick file across the table. "Full transparency, complete cooperation, no stone unturned. The Pentagon is breathing down our necks, the media is having a field day, and the mayor wants answers yesterday." Detective Park opened the file and immediately understood why everyone looked so uncomfortable. The evidence was overwhelming, not just the viral videos, but official military documentation confirming Jade Romano's identity, service record, and authorization to conduct operations at Westfield Industrial Complex. "How did this happen?" she asked. "That's what you're going to find out," Chen replied. "But Park, this goes deeper than just two officers having a bad day. We've been getting calls from other veterans, other incidents. This might be a pattern." The investigation that followed would expose systematic problems within the department that had been festering for years. Park worked methodically, reviewing arrest records, interviewing witnesses, and following paper trails that led to uncomfortable conclusions about training, supervision, and accountability. Her first major discovery came when she cross-referenced Hayes and Brooks's arrest records with civilian complaints. Over the past 3 years, they had been involved in 14 incidents involving veterans or active military personnel. In each case, the victims' credentials had been dismissed as fake, their explanations ignored, their treatment unnecessarily harsh. "Look at this pattern," Park told her supervisor during their weekly briefing. Every single military ID was labeled as suspected counterfeit in their reports. Every single veteran was described as possible stolen valor case. They weren't making honest mistakes. They were targeting people based on their military status. The deeper she dug, the worse it got. She found training materials that contained outdated information about military identification, supervisors who had signed off on reports without proper review, and a departmental culture that prioritized arrests over accuracy. But the most damaging evidence came from the officers themselves. During their mandatory interviews, both Hayes and Brooks revealed attitudes that shocked even experienced internal affairs investigators. "Look, we deal with a lot of fake veterans," Brooks had said during his recorded statement. "Guys claiming PTSD for disability benefits, women pretending they were in combat units that don't allow females. It's easier to assume they're lying until they prove otherwise." Hayes had been even more explicit. "Military people think they're better than everyone else. Sometimes you need to bring them down a peg, show them they're not special just because they wore a uniform." The interviews revealed a toxic mindset that viewed veterans not as citizens deserving respect, but as potential threats to police authority. The systematic humiliation of Jade Romano hadn't been an aberration, it had been standard operating procedure. Representative James Sullivan called for congressional hearings within 48 hours of the story breaking. Standing before a bank of microphones on the Capitol steps, he held up printed screenshots from the viral videos. "This is not just about two officers in one department," he declared. "This is about a culture that has forgotten that those who serve in uniform, whether military or law enforcement, are supposed to protect each other, not prey upon each other." The political response was swift and bipartisan. Veterans organizations demanded accountability. Civil rights groups cited the case as evidence of broader police misconduct. Military leaders expressed outrage at the treatment of one of their own. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source: other veterans who had remained silent about their own experiences with law enforcement. Detective Park's office was flooded with calls from veterans who had been mistreated, dismissed, or humiliated by police officers who refused to believe their military credentials were genuine. Each story followed a similar pattern: initial disbelief, escalating confrontation, systematic humiliation, and official indifference to complaints. "I was pulled over for speeding," one caller told Park. "When I showed my military ID along with my driver's license, the officer accused me of impersonating a soldier. I spent 4 hours in jail while they verified my identity. My command had to send someone to pick me up." Another veteran described being arrested for trespassing on a military base where he worked. "I was in civilian clothes, coming back from lunch. The gate guard was new and didn't recognize me. Instead of checking my ID properly, he called local police. They treated me like a terrorist trying to infiltrate the base." The stories kept coming, each one documenting a system that seemed designed to doubt, degrade, and dismiss the very people it was supposed to serve. What had happened to Jade Romano wasn't an isolated incident. It was the visible tip of an iceberg that had been growing for years. Detective Park compiled her preliminary findings into a report that would eventually become the foundation for department-wide reforms. But as she worked late into the night, reviewing evidence and organizing testimony, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real story wasn't about what had happened to Jade Romano. The real story was about what hadn't happened to her. Unlike the other victims who had suffered in silence, Jade had possessed something that made her situation different. Backup that was coming whether the local authorities believed in it or not. Her humiliation had been documented, her vindication had been dramatic, and her story had been impossible to ignore or dismiss. But how many other veterans had endured similar treatment without Black Hawks coming to extract them? How many had been dismissed, degraded, and forgotten by a system that should have protected them? As Park worked through the night, she realized she wasn't just investigating 2 officers who made a mistake. She was documenting the systematic failure of institutions that had lost sight of their fundamental purpose: to serve and protect all citizens, especially those who had already served their country. The Jade Romano case would become a catalyst for change, but only because her story had ended with vindication. The real tragedy lay in all the stories that had ended with silence.
3 weeks after the Westfield incident, Jade Romano was sitting in a military briefing room, reviewing communication protocols with her unit when the emergency alert came through. Multiple explosions had rocked downtown Metro City, with reports of active shooters in 3 separate locations and possible chemical weapons deployment. The crisis was unfolding in real time across every news channel and social media platform. Local authorities were overwhelmed, federal response teams were en route, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Initial reports suggested a coordinated terrorist attack designed to maximize casualties and create widespread panic. Lieutenant Colonel Turner burst into the briefing room. "Romano, I need you geared up in 5 minutes. We're being deployed as emergency communications support." "Yes, sir," Jade replied, already moving toward her equipment. But as she began pulling on her tactical gear, Turner continued with information that stopped her cold. "The local incident command center is being run jointly by state police and Metro City PD. Their primary liaison officers are," Turner paused, checking her notes, "Officers Caleb Hayes and Mason Brooks." The irony was bitter and complete. The same officers who had spent 90 minutes humiliating her, destroying her equipment, and dismissing her credentials were now depending on her expertise to coordinate a response that could save hundreds of lives. "I can handle it," Jade said quietly. "I know you can. But I need to know, will you?" It was a fair question. Jade had every right to request reassignment.
to let someone else work with the officers who had treated her like a criminal and a fraud. No one would blame her for prioritizing her own emotional well-being over professional duty. They need the best communication support available, Jade said, adjusting her tactical vest. Personal feelings don't factor into that equation. 20 minutes later, she was walking into the Metro City Emergency Operations Center, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into a high-tech command hub. Multiple agencies were represented: FBI, ATF, state police, local law enforcement, fire departments, and medical response teams. The controlled chaos of a major incident response was in full swing. Hayes saw her first. He was coordinating with state police commanders when he spotted her distinctive tactical gear and realized who had just entered the operations center. His face went pale, and he immediately began whispering urgently to his partner. Brooks turned and saw Jade approaching their communication station. For a moment, both officers looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. That the crisis unfolding outside left no room for personal embarrassment or awkward apologies. Staff Sergeant Romano, the incident commander, called out, "We need communication coordination between ground teams and federal air support. Can you establish encrypted channels for tactical coordination?" "Yes, sir," Jade replied, moving to the communication console without acknowledging Hayes or Brooks directly. She began powering up equipment and establishing satellite connections with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Within minutes, she had established secure communication links between the various response teams, federal aircraft, and command centers in Washington. Her expertise was immediately apparent. Radio chatter that had been chaotic and fragmented suddenly became organized and effective.
Ground Team Alpha, this is Overwatch. Jade's voice carried clearly through the operations center as she coordinated aerial reconnaissance with street-level response. Confirm visual on Sector 7, building clear, proceeding to Sector 8. Hayes and Brooks found themselves working directly alongside her, providing local knowledge and street-level intelligence while she managed the technical coordination that made their information useful to federal response teams. The awkwardness was palpable, but the urgency of the situation forced them to function as a team. When Hayes needed to relay information about building layouts, Jade made sure his communication reached the right tactical teams. When Brooks identified potential escape routes, she coordinated aerial surveillance to monitor those areas. "This is incredible," the incident commander observed to Turner, who had arrived to monitor her soldiers' performance. "Your communications specialist is making our entire operation run like clockwork." Turner watched Jade work with quiet pride. Despite everything Hayes and Brooks had put her through, she was now working tirelessly to ensure their success. She could have let personal resentment interfere with her performance, could have found subtle ways to make their jobs more difficult, could have allowed the humiliation she had endured to compromise her professionalism. Instead, she was saving their careers. The tactical teams on the ground began reporting successful coordination of their movements, federal air support was providing real-time intelligence that prevented casualties, and the multi-agency response was functioning with unusual efficiency for such a complex operation. "How is she doing this?" Brooks asked Turner during a brief lull in communications traffic. "We destroyed her equipment, treated her like garbage, humiliated her in front of dozens of people. Why is she helping us?" Turner looked at him with an expression that mixed contempt with pity. "Because she's a professional soldier and you needed help. That's what professionals do. They put the mission above personal grievances." Hayes was monitoring radio traffic when he overheard a conversation between federal agents praising the communication coordination they were receiving. "This is the smoothest multi-agency operation I've ever been part of," one agent reported. "Whoever's running communications deserves a commendation." The comment hit him like a physical blow. 3 weeks ago, he had dismissed this woman as a fraud and a criminal. Now, federal agents were praising her work and recommending her for awards. As the crisis continued to unfold, Jade's calm professionalism became the backbone of the entire operation. She anticipated communication needs before they arose, resolved technical problems with minimal disruption, and maintained perfect coordination between agencies that typically struggled to work together. At one point, when a technical malfunction threatened to cut communication with a tactical team in a dangerous position, she bypassed normal protocols and established direct satellite communication that probably saved their lives.
Outstanding work, the incident commander announced as the situation finally stabilized 6 hours later. This could have been a disaster, but excellent coordination kept casualties minimal and ensured rapid resolution. As teams began standing down and equipment was secured, Hayes approached Jade hesitantly. "Staff Sergeant Romano," he began, his voice uncertain. She looked at him directly for the first time since entering the operations center. "Officer Hayes." He struggled to find words. "Thank you for what you did today, for helping us despite everything." Jade studied his face for a moment, seeing genuine remorse and dawning understanding of what he had almost cost the community. "You're welcome," she said simply. Then she turned and began packing her equipment, leaving Hayes to contemplate the difference between real heroism and the cheap authority he had mistaken for strength.
6 months later, the morning sun cast long shadows across a very different scene at Westfield Industrial Complex. The abandoned warehouses had been transformed into a state-of-the-art training facility for joint military-civilian emergency response exercises. Where Jade Romano had once knelt in zip ties while officers destroyed her equipment, tactical teams now practiced coordinated operations under her supervision. The transformation wasn't just physical. The Westfield incident had sparked comprehensive reforms that rippled through law enforcement agencies nationwide. The Romano protocols, named after the case that exposed the problem, now required officers to verify military credentials through proper channels before making arrests, mandated cultural sensitivity training for interactions with veterans, and established clear consequences for misconduct targeting military personnel. Detective Lisa Park's investigation had resulted in the prosecution of Hayes and Brooks for civil rights violations, destruction of federal property, and official misconduct. Both officers received prison sentences and were permanently barred from law enforcement. But more importantly, her work had identified and corrected systemic problems that had affected hundreds of veterans. Representative Sullivan's congressional hearings had led to federal legislation requiring standardized training for police interactions with military personnel, funding for veteran liaison programs, and oversight mechanisms to prevent future incidents of institutional bias. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The viral videos of Jade's humiliation, followed by her professional vindication, had created a powerful narrative about the difference between authentic authority and abuse of power. Her silence during the ordeal, followed by her competent leadership during the crisis response, had become a masterclass in true strength. Jade stood in the facility's main conference room, briefing a mixed group of military personnel and civilian law enforcement officers on communication protocols for joint operations. Her audience included chiefs of police, federal agents, and military commanders, all of whom treated her with the respect her expertise had earned. The key to successful multi-agency coordination, she was saying, is understanding that rank and authority mean nothing if they're not backed by competence and mutual respect. In the back of the room, Lieutenant Colonel Turner watched with quiet satisfaction. The woman who had endured 90 minutes of systematic humiliation without breaking had become one of the military's most sought-after instructors for interagency cooperation. After the briefing, Turner approached her. She asked, "How does it feel, being back where it all started?" Jade looked around the transformed facility, noting the advanced communication equipment, the professional training materials, the respectful atmosphere. "Different," she said finally. "Better." "Any regrets about how you handled the original incident?" Jade considered the question carefully. "No," she said. "Fighting back in the moment would have confirmed their assumptions about military personnel being aggressive and uncontrollable. Staying silent let them reveal who they really were." Turner nodded. "And now, thousands of officers have seen what happens when you confuse authority with power?"
The training facility had become a pilgrimage site of sorts for law enforcement leaders who wanted to understand how their profession had gone wrong and how to fix it. The spot where Jade had knelt was now marked with a simple plaque. Strength is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Courage is not the absence of vulnerability, but grace under pressure. That evening, Jade sat in her quarters, reviewing reports from similar training programs being established around the country. The Romano protocols were being implemented in over 200 departments, veteran liaison programs were operating in 30 states, and incidents of military credential dismissal had dropped by 80%. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw your interview on the news. I'm a veteran who was arrested last year in a similar situation. Thanks to your case, the charges were dropped and the officers received additional training. Thank you for staying strong." It was one of dozens of similar messages she received every week. Veterans whose cases had been reopened, officers who had received better training, departments that had reformed their procedures, all because she had remained silent when silence was strength, and spoken when her voice was needed. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young soldier in dress uniform holding an official document. "Staff Sergeant Romano, I'm here to inform you that you've been selected for promotion to Sergeant First Class effective immediately. Additionally, you're being awarded the Army Commendation Medal for exceptional service in developing interagency cooperation protocols." Jade accepted the promotion orders and medal citation with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. But as the young soldier left, she allowed herself a small smile. 6 months ago, 2 officers had tried to break her by destroying her equipment and her dignity. They had failed completely. Not only had she survived their abuse, she had transformed it into something constructive that would benefit thousands of people. The real victory wasn't the promotion or the award. It wasn't even the reforms or the recognition. The real victory was that she had proven something important about character, that true authority comes from competence and service, not from the power to humiliate others. Late that night, Jade walked out to the loading dock where she had been forced to kneel 6 months earlier. The concrete was clean now, the area well lit and professionally maintained, but she could still remember the feeling of zip ties cutting into her wrists, the sound of her equipment being destroyed, the cruel laughter of officers who thought they had broken her. They had been wrong about everything: her credentials, her mission, her character, and most importantly, her strength. Standing where she had once knelt in forced submission, Staff Sergeant Jade Romano looked up at the stars and allowed herself to feel what she hadn't permitted during those 90 minutes of humiliation: pride in her service, confidence in her abilities, and satisfaction in knowing that her sacrifice had made things better for others. She had won, not by fighting back, but by staying true to who she was when it would have been easier to break. And that victory would last long after the videos stopped being shared and the headlines faded from memory. Some battles are won through violence. Others are won through silence. The best are won through service. Jade Romano had won all 3.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.